Hello, everybody, and welcome to our June session for Doctor Integration. This month, we'll be doing a Better Together session where we'll be talking about how to integrate API management using TCI. So our API management tools, also known as Mashery, and we're going to be primarily using our call log WebSocket output and integrating that using both Flogo and TCI Connect. Okay. So for this session, we want to make sure we understand the prerequisites, everything we need to get everything up and going. We'll go through our typical setup where we'll look at our connections and getting everything set up on all fronts, including our databases and our target system. Then we'll go into using Flogo to integrate with the WebSocket. And then we'll talk about using TCI Connect to take that data from that database and then push it out to a CRM system. And we'll give you a list of resources at the end so you can be sure you know all of the links. All right, so what are the prerequisites for this particular month's setup? Well, first, you're going to need a database of your choice. And in this case, we're using MySQL. You could use any SQL database that you'd like. You could, for this session, we're going to be using a cloud-based SQL installation. Of course, you could use an on-premise agent. You could use an on-premise setup, but it would be a little different. If you're using an on-premise setup, you would need to install an on-premise agent for TCI Connect, as well as a hybrid agent for Flogo if you're going to use something that was behind your firewall. It's slightly different configuration and setup there, but the integration and the architecture is pretty much the same. Of course, you need a subscription to Mashery in order to be able to access your API management, and you'll need your TCI subscription to be able to use Flogo and Connect. Additionally, for this case, we're going to be using a target system. We're going to use Salesforce. And the reason I like Salesforce is because they provide a free developer account that makes it very easy to test your integrations against a sample CRM system. And it's nice because it doesn't expire as long as you use it occasionally and log in and make sure that it's still active. And of course, we're going to be using Postman to simulate our API calls to our Mashery system. So for the setup, the first thing we're going to do is create our database schema, and we're going to base this off the call log JSON that's in our documentation. Then we're going to configure our custom object in Salesforce. We're going to do some whitelisting. Then we're going to create our database connections for both Flogo and Connect. Then we'll create the Salesforce connection, and we're going to turn on the call logs and API management. Let's kind of walk through all those different steps. And one thing I like to point out here is that so often when we're testing integrations, so much of the work is done in just getting the data, getting the systems that we need, getting access to those systems, getting data into those systems, right? It's, the integration in some ways, and I think we'll see when we get to the end of it, the integration is actually the easiest part of all this. So a lot of this is just getting the groundwork and the foundation there so we can actually do the testing, right? So for me, for my personal things I like MySQL because it's generally freely available, and I have a shared hosting plan that I can use. I can spin up databases very easily on, and like I mentioned, Salesforce is very easy to use, and of course, Postman, free for everybody. All right, let's walk through some of those pieces here for this configuration. And the first thing we're going to look at is our call log streams. So we head over to our documentation for API management, also known as Mashery, and we see that the schema for this call log stream is here's a sample schema for this, all right? And this is going to be useful in a couple places. First, it's going to be useful in three places, right? The places where we're going to be storing this and integrating it. So first of all, we're going to use this schema to create a MySQL table that we're going to push this data into when it's triggered by the WebSocket. Then we're going to use this as a schema within our Flogo flow in order to parse the incoming data, right? And then we're going to use this as a schema for our custom object in Salesforce. We're going to actually store this. So as we go through this, in some cases, I'm going to be using all these fields. In other cases, I'll just be using a couple sample fields, and you'd have to do all the mapping on your own. So here's what I did for this is there's a little site here called JSON to SQL Converter. So what I did was I pasted this JSON code. And the first thing you'll notice here is the user agent, this string, a lot of parsers don't like this particular string. So I usually shorten it to just Mozilla for sampling purposes. And if you head over to this website, convert JSON to SQL, you can actually paste this sample in here, and it will, when you convert it, it'll give you all the fields, the field names and the types, the data types and the sizes and everything that you can use. And this will create a basic SQL inserts, a SQL create table statement that you can use to do the schema for your table, right? This tool will obviously save you a lot of time. So I'll just show you what that ultimately looked like. Of course, when you're taking this, when it's doing the size here, and this is something you'll have to define when you're doing all of your testing, is, the size is based upon the sample data set. So I just gave it sort of a standard size of 256. So here's what my ultimately, so here's the JSON. I just took, this is the JSON that we use here that we're going to use for our Flogo, our Flogo schema. And here's the SQL that is generated by this. So I'm calling this table API log, pretty straightforward, right? And then here are all the fields that are in here. So as far as the field lengths and everything, when I knew what the maximum size was, I put it to that. Otherwise, I did 256. For the numeric field, I decided to give it 4 digits of 4 precision after the decimal. That was, sort of my own thoughts on that. I don't know exactly what the precision is on Mashery. It's probably only down to milliseconds. So this should be more than sufficient for us to get the data that's coming over through those call logs. All right. So now as we have this schema, we update our database with that. Now we have a database with that particular schema in it. And here you can see, here's a case where we have this database here using our PHP MyAdmin, another open source tool that we can use to access our data for MySQL. All right. Then we're going to go over and configure our custom object in Salesforce. And I'm still using the old setup here, right? So you can go over to the where is it? It's build, it's create, and then objects, and then you can create a custom object here. So I created a custom object called API log over here in Salesforce, right? And as you can see, I only put a couple fields in it. I have a link to the parent contact record, and then I have the UUID, which is the unique identifier for each call log that comes in. All right. And we'll see what it looks like to update this momentarily, but I want to get the basic foundation of this integration and show how everything works. And then we can show you how that's going to change. All right. Another thing we want to do is be sure that we're whitelisting the IP addresses. Let me see if I have those pages up here, and I do. So because we're using both Flogo and Connect, each one of them have their own set of IP addresses for where the agents are running. So Flogo is written in Golang. It runs as a containerized version in TCI, and then TCI Connect runs our agents are deployed in our TCI cloud. So there's different sets of whitelist IP addresses you need to configure for each of your particular capabilities within TCI. So for Flogo, here's the list of IP addresses you need to whitelist, and I'm running off of US Oregon for Flogo. So these are the ones that I have set up. Now, where am I whitelisting these? Well, in this case, I'm whitelisting this in my configuration for my MySQL. Something you always want to keep in mind when you do integrations is that any of the endpoints that you're interfacing with, there's going to have probably some type of IP whitelisting requirement, and you need to go in there and set those up. All right. So here's these links will be in the resources page that we'll provide at the end. So here's, depending on which region you're in, here's your list of IP addresses, and the same thing here for TCI Connect. Also called Scribe. Our cloud agents are set up in here. So this is AWS US. So I'm going to have these whitelisted over in both Salesforce. So I'm going to have these whitelisted in Salesforce and MySQL, but I only need to whitelist these in MySQL because Flogo is going to be connecting to MySQL for the WebSocket, and then I'm going to use TCI Connect /Scribe in order to query that database and then pull that data down. Right. So what's our use case here? Sort of taking a step back. Our use case is, we have API management, and we want to track all of the logs, and we want to capture all the call logs. We've turned the call logs on. We want to capture all those in a database, and in that database we can use any type of analytics. You could use Spotfire to do the analytics on that. In fact, we think we have a demo on that somewhere. I'll try to get that in one of our sessions. And then we want to take that information and then also put it into our CRM system. All right. Pretty straightforward, and we'll see how easy it is to do that with all the integration tools that we have at our disposal with TCI. So we're back to the whitelisting. I'm not going to show you the configuration on this, but within Salesforce, you can configure the whitelisting for these incoming IP addresses. And in my MySQL, I'll do the same thing for both Scribe and Flogo. All right. Now I'm going to go into integration. So after you log on to TCI and then you select integrations, you'll see your list of apps here. All right. And again, I always want to point out you can use these filters on the left-hand side to help you organize the different capabilities and the different functionalities that we have and the different different places where you are. So of course, every time so again, there's a little difference between TCI Connect and Flogo. Within Flogo, the way the containerized edition works, the connection code is actually deployed as part of the container, whereas within TCI Connect, the connection DLLs are attached as a .NET attached as part of the .NET application, and you need to activate those in the marketplace first. And what that really does is it deploys those DLLs to all the agents that you have. And then those agents will be able to access those DLLs at the runtime of the integration. All right. So I've obviously already activated the ones that I need. So for TCI Connect, I'm going to activate Salesforce, and you can search up here. All right. So we can see Salesforce. And I also want to be sure I'm selecting Connect as a capability. All right. So in this case, I'm going to go connectors for Salesforce, and we can see here that Salesforce here is the one. And if you select this, you can see this has already been installed. All right. And the same thing here for MySQL. We can see that Oracle MySQL has already been installed for our organization. All right. And again, the only time you need to activate these connectors in the marketplace is when you're using it for TCI Connect and not with Flogo. Right. Then we head over, and once we've done that, we create our connections. And I've already created my connections here. We'll just kind of walk through what those look like. So for MySQL, all right, we can see I've created a connection in Flogo, and that's what this one looks like right here. So you just go over and create the connection, enter the parameters, and then it would test the connection and all right here, right? So here we just have our connection parameters we can set up here, all right? And then the same thing for our MySQL connector within TCI Connect, all right? We do the same thing here, have our basic parameters that we have here, database, schema, URL, username and password, everything like that, right? And then for Salesforce, we're going to have the same thing. And we have Salesforce here. And there's a couple different options with Salesforce. You can use OAuth or you can use basic auth. And if you use basic auth, you either need an additional security token or need to whitelist these IP addresses within Salesforce. And that's what we talked about, the whitelisting, right? So you can use basic auth or you can use the OAuth, all right? So we've created our connection. Now we just want to head over to API management and turn on our call logs. And that's actually pretty easy. It's already been done for us. So we go over, I already did this before. So you just go over and do the call log streams. And then when this is not turned on, basically there's a button that says turn on call logs. And then you end up with the call logs being turned on. All right. And the call logs, this is a test system I have for our Mashery / API management. And you can see here what the URL is when we go over to this section here, and this is what we're going to use to configure Flogo. All right. Okay, pretty straightforward. So now within Flogo, we're going to create or use an existing app. Then we're going to create a flow with a WebSocket trigger. We're going to cut and paste that JSON to create it, and then we're going to use a MySQL activity in order to be able to write it out to that database. All right. Let's head over to Flogo and see what that looks like. So again, back to our TCI, TIBCO Cloud integration. Head over to our apps. And I'll show you the one that I already created here, this one right here. So pretty easy to do. You just create the app first, and then you add the flow to it here. So if I was going to create a new flow, I would go here and I would start with the flow, and I would call it something like, APIM to, all right. create this here. And then it would ask me to, you start with the trigger in this case, all right? And as you can see, I've already searched for the WebSocket trigger. So if I cancel here, if I add a trigger, all right, for some reason it's still doing the search. Oh, it's using an existing trigger. That's why. All right. So I could add a new trigger using the existing trigger. So if I'm going to add a new trigger, I would search for WebSocket. Then I'd go WebSocket subscriber, right? And then I would configure the WebSocket subscriber with the URI. And basically all I do is just cut and paste that in here. And then I'm going to map those flow to the inputs and sync that up. All right. That's pretty straightforward in how you create this. So let's see what this looks like here. Let's delete this one because we don't need it. All right. And let's delete. All right. Delete that. Okay, great. So this is what we're using here. So we're going to enter this flow and see how we set it up. So the first thing we did is we configured that. And again, for security, if you're curious, although in your account you may have you may have both TCI and API management, the WebSockets are just a generic WebSocket, and they can pass between any different accounts, right? So they don't have to be tied to your particular account. So here what we've done is set up this WebSocket, and that's it. There's no parameters. And what I did here with the body, well, first thing I did was I went over to the schemas, and then I created this application level schema called API management call log. And what I did here was I just cut and pasted this from the schema sample that was here, but I just, again, minimized this. So the thing to realize here is that, let's talk a little bit about this. So this schema is actually in a type array. So we see here, this is actually an array type. Now you would think, hey, would this be just a single record? Well, what happens is it's possible that Mashery will bunch up several records together and then send it over as an array. And there can also be, a little delay between the time the actual call is executed and when it shows up on the WebSocket. All right. So when we're programming our flow, we need to be aware that the incoming schema is going to be an array. Pretty straightforward, but just you need to be aware of that. So generally, when I'm within Flogo here, I usually like to use my application level schemas. Just makes it easier, a single place that you can manage things. All right. So when we're configuring this here, again, you just go down here and you just say when you first add this, you toggle this will use the schema, and then you can select which one you want. So you can do the application level schema. And again, then you head over to the map flow to inputs, you sync this creates the flow inputs for the flow itself. And this is a piece of the conceptually how Flogo works. The trigger and the flow itself are really two separate things, and you can have multiple triggers against a given flow. So generally, so there's a schema for the trigger, there's an outbound schema for the trigger, and there's an inbound schema for the flow. And the way that you create that inbound schema for the flow is you can either manually enter it, or you can just hit the sync button here. When I do this, it basically copies my output from the trigger and then turns that into flow inputs. And in this case here, what we see is our trigger, our content is basically just the content object where everything's coming in, all right? And we're just mapping that out to our flow input. So basically the flow itself is expecting that to come in. And that's really all there is to this WebSocket piece here. It's really simple to configure here, all right? And again, we can see that, wow, this is really easy to do, really easy from a programming point of view. All we're doing here is we're doing this MySQL insert statement. So what does this look like? Well, how we do it here is we'd add an activity, add a MySQL insert activity, and then configure it as we'll see here. All right. So again, here's where the fact that we're expecting an incoming array where we're going to use our loop within Flogo here. So the first thing we do when we step into this activity is head over to the loop, make sure that the loop is looping through the correct array. So we head over to the upstream here. It's the flow, it's the content, and it's the data here. So we can see this is what it looks like. What the pointer is on this. So it's flow, content, data, and this turns into an array. And what do? We just iterate through this. There's no need to accumulate because all we're doing is executing on this. If we were going to do some other processing, we may have another activity which again loop through our incoming array, or we could, in some cases, when you are doing some type of activity, you can create an accumulator which generates an array of all the records out there. But we don't really care about that because all we're doing is looping through and doing insert statements. Right? So the settings here, pretty straightforward. We get the MySQL connection, and this is going to be the insert statement. Then what we do here is we, first thing I do is usually go down and get all the fields. So you go down and say select star from API log. If you do the fetch here, this is going to generate the fields. Little pro tip here: anytime you have a SQL statement within Flogo, make sure you close it off, with a semicolon. It's expecting that, and that's the key that it's going to parse and execute this statement. Right. So again, what we see here is once we do the select statement and fetch, it's going to populate the field names down here of all the fields in our database, so we can see everything we have. Now, in this case, I'm only using the UUID for this particular API call. So I head down to the UUID here, request UUID, all right, and then I do the edit. I edit it here, and then I set it as a parameter, right? And that's going to allow me to be able to use this question mark here on the parameter so when we insert the values, all right? So now you see I have to build my own SQL statement here, and depending on how you can get this, actually, PHPMyAdmin gives you the online tool gives you the ability to build this SQL statement. That's actually where I started, and I would use that if I was going to do that. I'd probably want to find some way to build a SQL statement for me instead of trying to do it manually. Right? But in this case, we just have a single field for demonstration purposes, right? And then and really that's it, right? So there's the input. The input is inserted into the API logs, the field and the values, typical SQL statement. And you can see here that this question mark indicates a parameter, and that's the parameter piece that was indicated here. And then on the input, all right, here's where you map the parameter from the here's where you map the parameter from the iteration loop to the particular object here. All right. So all these things are going to come as parameters. We can see here that this is the value of the current pointer in the array of the object that we're at. And then we can see that we have this request UUID, and it's mapped to the parameter. The parameter here, request UUID. And as we add more parameters to our input settings, we'll see more of them here. All right. The output is just an array output of the rows affected, and the loop here we've already seen that we've configured. All right. And that's really it. Okay, now what does this do? So it waits for that WebSocket. When it gets it, it adds this record to our MySQL table. Boom, we're done. All right. So let's see what this looks like from some previous ones that I've added. So as you can see here in my PHPAdmin, these are the ones that I previously added. I have a test one, and then again, there's all the fields here are blank. So I'll just go over to Postman and I'll execute another call against this. As far as what's configured in Mashery, I have a simple Postman echo setup. So I'll send a couple more requests over on my other screen here that you're not seeing. Then I'll refresh this and we'll see what other records have come in, right? So let's hit this again. And nothing yet. Again, there can definitely be a delay with that. If you're lucky, it'll happen right away. Otherwise, it might take a little while. All right. Oh yeah, of course, once you're in Flogo, you have to push that app and you have to deploy and push it as usual. All right. So yeah, that is, there it is. So we see that one came in and then another one came in, and these are the ones that I just set up here. So these are the new records that are coming in. All right, pretty straightforward. Now we have this in our database. So you would go through and you would just add the additional fields to this particular activity and then map all those. And that's, you probably would need some type conversion depending upon what's incoming. If you have that configured as a string on your JSON, usually what I do is just say all the JSON coming as a string, and I'll type convert it as I push it to my database. That's one strategy you can use. Your mileage may vary on that. All right, so that's how we do it. Pretty straightforward. Notice how the easiest part of this all was setting it up within Flogo, getting all the data and configuring everything was all, really the groundwork for all this. So now let's see what we can do with this using TCI Connect. So let's head over to our on schedule apps here, and we can see that we have I think there's a workshop one here. Here it is. So here's the one I put my workshop ones in here. Now, what does this look like here? So we're going to be using the existing app and create new. We're going to create our flow. Then we'll add the MySQL and Salesforce connections. Then we do a query and upsert on that. All right. So in this case, we're going to use the sample flow we're going to use for our sample here to push this data from MySQL into Salesforce. So we saw that we created a custom object in Salesforce. All right. And now we're going to see how we execute on this within our app here. Okay. So then what we do is we query our API log, and in this case, we could use either the high watermark on the net change, or we could use I have an integration flag, so I use that as a query there. So this is queries on the filter to make sure the integration flag is, if it's null, we're going to skip. We're going to only select ones that are null because those are newly inserted records. Then we're going to do an upsert on our API log, which is our custom object. Of course, once you add this to Salesforce, you'd be sure that you need to reset head over here and reset the metadata so it exposes that object. And because I configured my unique ID as an external ID within Salesforce, that's what the upsert is going to match on when it does it. All right. So this has some rerun tolerance built into it. If for some reason, this gets rerun against the logs, it won't create any new records because we're using this upsert operation. And on the field mapping here, pretty straightforward. All you do is in the general tab, you select the object you're gonna use, head over to the fields. And in this case, we noticed that the request GUID field was set. Now I just want to show you something here. So we take this out, right? The new smart mapper actually will map this for us. So if we select all the fields on the left-hand side here, and then we select all the fields on the right-hand side, okay, and we do the smart mapper, it's going to actually populate this. So it sees that this field request UUID matches this one right here. All right. So of course with Salesforce, you always Salesforce puts this _C at the end of every custom field and custom object. It's not like within Dynamics 365 where you can name the field anything you want to. In this case, it's underscore. It always adds this _C, and then this. So the smart mapper makes it easy to map these custom fields. All right. In this case, all I'm doing is mapping this. Now, I'm not even bringing over the plan name here, but when we do this, we'll see how it runs. So then what I'm going to do on this is when I run this. So the other thing I want to do is actually I want to update the flag afterwards. Let's just run this again and see what it looks like. So I've already run this once for our Salesforce. So let's head over to Salesforce to see what this looks like. So these are all the ones here. All right. And then when I head back to TCI Connect, of course, you can always run an individual flow here. That's what I usually do when I'm testing, is I run the flows individually by heading over to the dot menu here, and then you do run flow. All right. These over here are actually these bulk actions are meant for lock and unlocking, exporting and deleting, enabling and disabling. All right. They're not meant for running. And if I were to go up here and run, it would take the normal path for this app and run all of these in order. And this is how the on schedule apps work within TCI. Is the order in which the flows are presented is the order that they run. They run one at a time and then complete. So in this case, we're just using this for testing. You could imagine this being part of a larger integration. If say we were integrating our MySQL database to Salesforce, you could see this being part of a larger integration. But we're just using this as a sample right here. We'll see how that connects in. So we're going to run this flow. All right, it'll say that we're starting. The flow successfully started, and we can see that the status changes to starting. So it's doing the initialization right now. And then we can go over the execution history and see where this actually starts. total records processed. Let's see process 6, and it's probably done already. There's a little lag time between the finish of the execution and when this goes through. And then here, if we do a refresh now, we can see that all these other records came on. All right. So that's pretty much it. If you wanted to go back and then add additional fields, you would head back to your apps, and then you would go to the Flogo app. So you need to add the fields in a couple places. All right. So we know all the fields are in the database, and we know all the fields are being processed in the incoming schema, and we know that the API manager call logs through that WebSocket are always going to send that entire schema over for everything, right? So in order for us to map all those additional fields, we would head over to our develop. We would go to here, and then we would, in this, we'd head over to our SQL input settings here, and then we'd add the rest of the fields and the values in here, all right? And like I said, there may need to be some type conversion on that. So we'd want to be sure that we did that as necessary. And then the other place we need to do is go into Salesforce, add the rest of those fields, and then push that in there. But we have the groundwork for what we need. We have the external ID using the custom, using the GUID from this call. We have the database configured and set up. We have everything that we need. All right. All right. So as you can see, the integration is sometimes the easiest part of all this, getting all the data and everything set up. So then we have our resources here. We'll make this page available on the website too. So the Mashery call log schema, the whitelisting. You could sign up for this Salesforce developer account, what I use for integrations. And here's this little thing. I just Googled convert JSON to SQL, and this is what came up. And that's that website that actually does that for us. All right. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for your time. And I hope you got something out of the session. And please be sure to tune in every month for our Doctor integration session. And then check TIBCO events for all of our other sessions. We have Dr. Spotfire, streaming, Jaspersoft, data science, right? We have a lot of monthly content out there. We also have Ask the Expert office hours, which gives you an opportunity to join us for a general Q&A session. So you can check the website on that to sign up for that. And you send us an email and we'll put you on our calendar invite for that. It's a little more informal. Basically, we have a session where once a month, people come up, ask questions. We have one for API management and one for TCI. So feel free to join those if you have any questions about these sessions or any general questions at all. All right, thank you very much. And we will see you next month.